Okay, now we're going to talk about the Tomlinson Run Church of Christ, which West Street was helped get this congregation started. And I want to thank the people that helped me get this information over the several years. Darlene Hanlon McKinney, and Roy Moore, and Lloyd Newsom, and Paul Blake, and Sister Dorothy Rowland, and there's others perhaps that helped me that I don't know, but I can't remember, but I appreciate their information. And this information is not new. It goes back several years. The members that come out here from West Street was Alvin Newsom, Howard Newsom, Burley Davis, and Roy. There was other members too that come here from, and they wanted to start a congregation in Pewtown, which is now called New Manchester. So they had a tent meeting in the Pewtown about 1946. And that was Brother C.D. Beagle held that meeting at that time. And they found an interest in starting a work there. So they rented a one-room schoolhouse in Pewtown to hold the services. Back then you could rent a schoolhouse and for church services. And my brother, I can remember my brother Scott, Paul, and I would worship there and went there in 1949. And we rode in the back of a pickup truck of my uncle's, and he was a member there, and that was Jim Wagner and my Aunt Jenny Wagner. They were members. I don't know anybody else that went there still living, but Dorothy Rowland and her sister Shirley attended service there also. Now there's and then there was a farm out there, they called it the poor farm, but older men they took there had no families, and they come there to worship. And there was, like I say, there was Hazel Reed too, and Roy Moore, and Lloyd and Lillian Newsom, and Halvin and Edith. Joyce was just a baby then, and Dorothy Rowland was about 12 or 13 years old, she told me, when she was there, and her sister was about 11 years old. And they would go there, and usually Burley Davis would have them at his house, and they would stay there during the Sunday afternoon, and then they'd have evening services. But when they couldn't do that, they would, Dorothy and them and Manford Lamp was the preacher, they would take their picnic lunch and they would stop out on Frankford Road, and Dorothy told me they had lunch under a tree in somebody's field, but she didn't know who the farm belonged to. But that's where they would stay in the summertime until it was time to, and Manford would go over his lesson. Now she has a note here too. It has nothing to do with, I don't think, the church here, but there was a meeting, she said, on Weir Avenue, and she attended it one time and remembered the good singing and things. So they used to have tent meetings and things. So in the schoolhouse, when they rented that, there was a small supply room, and it wasn't very big. It was just, and that's where they took all the kids. They only had one little room there. And the teacher was Alvin Newsom. And at that time, that was at the end of the war, he was probably about 23 or 24 years old. So they attended there and got some money. So they bought 2 building lots over on Route 8 in Pewtown, just right below where they got the new Family Dollar now, intending to build a building. And somehow they found out about this building and thought it might be for sale. So it was not in use, like I say, for about 20 years, and it belonged to the United Presbyterian Church. And so they disbanded, like I say, in 1934, and this was about 1954 when they was looking at the building and interested in buying it. So the Presbyterian headquarters for this district was over in Steubenville, Ohio. So they went over there. Howard Newsom was a spokesman for the group, and they made a deal for the building. And what was curious, they was going to tear the building down and move the building to Pewtown. Now that would be a job today, even with the modern equipment. Well, whenever they made the deal, they signed the papers and everything. Then Howard told them, he said, we'll move the building as soon as we can. And Lloyd said, the guy looked up and said, what do you mean move the building? They said, well, we got to get it off your property. He said, no, you got the property with it. They didn't even know they got the property. But that's a true story. So, well, that saved a big job, moving the building. But then there were some people, one family in particular thought that it wasn't right to move the church from Pewtown out here, but they did, and but it didn't cause any trouble. They just thought that was the thing to do. But they paid $1,500 for the building, and like I said, it was built in 1895. Matthew Nichols lived at a house here at the bottom of the hill where the other house is. He owned all this property in here. And of course, he had donated the ground, to the Presbyterian church. But that's and the cemetery. So that's how we got the ground and stuff. So well, now the building had no bathrooms, and it had outside restrooms. They had to build a couple outside restrooms, and there was no basement, no classrooms, no baptistry. There was nothing. So what they did, there was a fellow named Andrews out here on 168. He was a contractor. He had a high lift, and they hired him. It just had a furnace room, and the outside entrance is still the same one. And they had a coal furnace there, but they needed the classrooms. So they hired this Andrews, and he come with a high lift, and he dug a trench in under the building and come under here and dug the basement out under the building. And he had to have some nerves of steel to do that, but he did. And they kept, if you look at the basement, that's not the outside walls. There's about 4 feet of dirt between that and the foundation. But that's what he did. So they put the restrooms down there in the classrooms, which was a big deal. It helped out. And I could remember when we come here in early 50s, they had no classrooms. So back where the coat rack is and where the baby's room is, that was open, and they hung. If you look at the woodwork, you can see a couple holes. They had pipe with sliding curtains, and we had one class on one side and another class on the other side. That was all the classrooms we had. And if somebody was baptized, they went to Chester. They would let them use a baptistry then. You didn't hear anything about other things, churches was all together. But that's how they held services here. So let's get where I'm at here now. But they had the ceilings. Like I said, the ceilings was real high, and it was echo, and you couldn't hardly heat the building. They had an oil furnace put in and stuff, but it was cold. And we had echoes that was made, it was just wasn't real good. So they had the ceiling put in, and then after they had, they got the basement done. And then, of course, they added these rooms and then the front rooms on the building. And I want to say, too, lots of times the sisters are overlooked. But they done a lot of work here. I can remember them being here scrubbing and working just like the men did. And they did a lot of work. And sisters are important to the work of the church. sometimes they're overlooked. It just shouldn't be. But they took care of the Lord's Supper, getting it prepared, and there's a lot of things that they could do that they don't really get credit for. I think that they should. So that's about the end of it. But I just we talked about younger boys and needs to be thinking about perhaps being elders, preachers, deacons, and the sisters, things that they can do, and so the church can keep moving and going on here. But I've got a question I've always wondered about. What if Ben and Laura Way back in 1935 said, let somebody else do it? What would have happened? Where would the church been today? But they were determined, and they got help. With the Lord's help, we're here today. So that's what I have on that. That's it.
So, Joe, tell me about the condition that you found the building in, because it had been sitting empty for 20 years.
Well, it was in rough shape. And actually, I don't know this, but I've been told this. A lot of the coon hunters, they used to come in here and get warm. I don't know how they did it, but that's what they did. And it was unlocked, and they get in. And but it sat here for 20 years, and the Presbyterian organization wouldn't allow nobody to have service or anything here. And then the Newsoms found out somehow about it and purchased it. That's how they got it. But it was in rough shape. There was wasps in here you wouldn't believe, and stuff like that. But like I say, the sisters scrubbed and the men painted and did a lot of work, and we finally got it straightened around. But the old timers worked hard to get it ready.
Joe, tell me about the preachers who have been here since the church was incepted, from when you started here till present.
Okay, well, we start with Pewtown. It was Manford Lamp. He filled in there at the schoolhouse. Then when they started here, I could remember Ted Hanlon was the preacher then. And then Ted was here, and then Richard come, and he was here, and he was the first one that lived in the house when they built it.
That was Richard Brewer.
Richard Brewer. And then Dave Brewer was here, and there was Owen Thomas, and then I can't think of the boy's name from Chicago was here for about a year.
BJ.
Yeah, BJ, yeah. And there was one other one I'm trying to think. My mind just...
Well, prior to BJ, Paul Blake was here.
Yeah, Paul Blake was here. And then there was one between...
was it Denzel Wharton?
No. I can't think of his name now. That's awful. But he, sadly to say, I could remember what he did, but he left the church. But he was here for quite some time. But that was the preachers that we had over the time.
Tell me about the elders who have been here.
Well, the first elders they had was Howard Newsom and Lloyd Newsom and Denzel Wharton. And then deacons was Alvin Newsom and Bart Wharton was the deacons. And then of course Lloyd of course passed away, and Denzel, he moved away. He retired, went back down to West Virginia. And that's when they got Albert Norman was an elder. And, Denzel was here then too with him. And I'm trying to think, names slipped me. But there was, I just can't think now.
That's okay.
My mind just sometimes stops.
That's all right.
But I can't think of their names. I can see their faces, but anyway, we've had and then later on, your dad was appointed elder, and deacon. I was appointed deacon at 71, and Dale DeGarmo, which he quit the church, but there was. I know back then too, Albert Norman and Lloyd was the elders, and Denzel Wharton, and that was there.
And then Carl Parsons.
Yeah, Carl was he was an elder.
And Ken Burdine.
Yeah, see now I know them people.
And Bill Gailey.
Yeah,
that's who I remember from when I was young.
Yeah. I just couldn't get the names. But they were there.
And you've been an elder for how long?
When I was a deacon for 37 years. I've been an elder. I've been 52 years, elder and deacon. So I was a deacon for 37 years, and then an elder to 52.
And during your deacon time, I believe you told me you were the janitor for the facility.
37 years. Yeah. Yeah, I was janitor. Took care of the cemetery.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the cemetery for a second. There's a Presbyterian cemetery that sits on the lot, but we've had any members been buried back there?
Yeah, but we found out we can't do that. I don't know. There was another thing in the deal. We're responsible for the cemetery, but we can't use it. And I know the elders tried, probably maybe 10 years ago or so. There was a group of people that was doing cemeteries, little ones, and we tried to get them to take it, and they said they had too many. They couldn't keep up what way it was. They didn't want it. But I mowed that for about 37 years. But we're not allowed to bury in there, and I don't understand that.
Well, I remember there was one burial back there. Rodney Gorby.
Yeah. We didn't know it at the time we buried him there. We didn't know we couldn't do that. Right. See, it seemed like, I don't know, when the deal was made for the building, I don't know, they evidently didn't have a lawyer or somebody to advise them what to do. But
well, I would doubt it, being they thought they had just bought the building and not the land it was sitting on. I don't know if they had legal representation there. They would have probably done that.
They did. They did.
And I know cemeteries have rules, especially there may have been plots that were sold to people that are never going to come due, but they still legally hold the rights to that ground.
Yeah.
So that probably plays into it.
So I don't know, but we buried Rod there, then we figured we'd have to move him. But nobody said anything. Now, Earl Miller, he was one of the men that oversaw the cemetery, but he's the one that found the grave for me. Because I talked to him when Rodney died, and here, this was, back the story up, me and Rod was here, and he was helping me mow one day. And he said, "Are we allowed to be buried here?" I said, "Well, as far as I know, we are." "Why?" He said, "This is where I'd like to be buried, by the building, by the church." 30 days we buried him. I'm not kidding you. He had a heart attack, died. Yeah.
I remember that.
And so we buried him. But I talked to Earl, and I said, "Earl, can we bury down there?" And I said, "You know anything about that cemetery?" Because I knew he did. He said, "Yeah, why?" And I told him, and of course he knew Rodney died. So he said, I said, "He wants to be buried down there." He said, "Well, Joe," he said, "you just don't want to start digging." Because he said, "There's a lot of people buried in there, no tombstones." Because they were poor people, So he told me, he said, he worked at a cemetery over in East Liverpool. He said, "I have a sounding bar." He said, "I'll bring it and I'll meet you down there." So we met. And that was the funniest thing. he could take that bar and hit it on the ground and listen. He would know if it was a casket in there. I don't know how it worked. It sounds like a fantasy story, but it's true.
Yeah.
I was with him when he did it. And he went down in there. He said, here's a place right here. He marked it. But he told me, he said, you don't dare start digging in here, not knowing. Because he said there were a lot of people during the Depression and stuff was buried in there. They couldn't afford a tombstone. And stuff. Now, the guy that donated all this ground, Matthew Nichols, his tombstone's up there, that great big gray one. That's the guy that owned all this property. He was, I guess, pretty wealthy. And in that day and age, you know what.
Well, I know that I used to root around in the graveyard when I was younger. I believe there is a tombstone from a soldier from the Spanish-American War, which is pretty far back.
Yeah.
Well, Joe, you mentioned to me that the building was actually built in 1895. And
there was 1 year before that.
What happened to it?
The Indians burned it. Yeah, that's the story.
And it was a log cabin, I believe, or a log.
It was a log cabin building. Mm-hmm.
And,
yeah, old timers had told me that. That's what happened. You know, over on this hill, you go up there and dig up there, you can find a lot of arrowheads and stuff. But that guy don't allow nobody on there now. But I know what the guys that collected them told me about that. And even over here where that have that sportsman's club back in there, well, that's part of that ground. They said there, you dig in there, you can find all kind of arrowheads and things. Yeah.
a lot of history in this area.
Yeah.
You know, and Joe, I'm glad today we got to take the time to sit down and go over this. I think it's going to be a great asset to the church here, and there's a lot of members interested in what we've done today. So
Yeah.
Can't wait to show them. Joe, why don't you tell me about the parsonage that was added to the property after it was bought by the church?
Okay, it was built in 1960, and the men of the congregation done the most of the work. And a man named Charles Yo, a member of the church, he was handy at carpenter work and stuff like that, and he oversaw the work there. And all the men that worked helped put it together, and they had to hire some of the work done, like getting the brick laid and stuff like that. But the men done most of the carpenter work and done it all.
And when did the first preacher move into the?
That was Richard Brewer. It was probably about 1961 when they got it completed. He moved in. Yeah.
And the house was definitely a nice addition to have for the preacher to be on property.
Yeah.
I believe most of them have had a garden.
Oh yeah.
While they've lived here.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, Richard, he had a big garden there, and they had trouble with the raccoons getting up in there. And one day I come over, there was a line laying across the road, electric line. I didn't know where to run across the line. That's when Owen Thomas was here. He had a radio down in the garden. He said, I play the radio, keep the coons out. But yeah, Richard was the first one that lived there, yeah.
And that garden has yielded a lot of food for the membership here.
Oh, yeah.
Over time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
it's great that they were able to do that. So, Joe, back in the 1970s, there was a division between the churches here in the area. Can you elaborate a little bit on how that was from where you were sitting?
Yeah, that the Herald of Truth come in, and it caused a lot of confusion. And even the Weirton Heights congregation was out on Pennsylvania Avenue. They said they wasn't going to get involved in that, and then they did. And a lot of the congregations started that, got hooked in on that. And but I can remember we'd have a gospel meeting here. I remember as a kid standing by the wall back there. You didn't have no seats. We'd have them down the aisle. Of course, you had to leave a little room to get out, And gospel meetings, that was something that was enjoyable. It's something, you could go to, well, at that time, Weirton Heights got involved in that. But when they first went out there, I'm not so sure I think that Herald of Truth was in progress. But when they really got hooked at it, I know it was out there Pennsylvania Avenue.
Well, for some of our younger viewers watching this, what was the Herald of Truth? What was
what it was, they wanted all the congregations that they could get to send them the money so they could support the television program. And where the problem come in, they were taking the work from different congregations and wanting to do it. That's what it amounted to. And they were overseeing the work. And then they found out they had some people working for them, companies or lawyers, that weren't even members of the church. That was in that organization. Now that's what I've heard, you know what I mean? I can't prove that, but it just, if the devil ever done something against the church, that was the worst thing. That and instrumental music, but that didn't split the church. There was more churches went for it than didn't. So it was worse than splitting the church, you know what I mean? And the congregations that didn't go with it, well, they kind of got put aside, you know. But that and instrumental music was the two worst things I think of myself that happened. But those people that took the television program and run that, they had the authority. And that's not the way. We got supposed to have elders, and congregations are supposed to be separate, you know, and we could fellowship one another, but we're not hooked together. But that's what it did. It just put them all under their thumb. And it just ruined the thing, you know.
That's not what the Bible teaches.
No. But, and how people that went for that, and what I'm disappointed in is some of the preachers that I mentioned here went for that. Surely they knew better than that.
Yeah.
But then it didn't stop there. Then it started. Now Weirton Heights, they've got a dining hall up there. They built that, you know, back here. They have a clothes closet. They give clothes away. You know, I don't know if that's good or bad. You know, we give clothes away. You know what I'm saying? If I have something, but they have their dinners back here, and they had the dinners in the building to start with, so they got that built. Yeah.
Well, the church here at Tomlinson Run has been, I feel, a pillar of sound teaching in the Ohio Valley for closing in on 80 years, close to.
Yeah, well, the first meeting they had was in 1946, and then that's when they started meeting up at the schoolhouse, and that was like say, you know, Howard and Winnie Newsom and Lloyd and Alvin and Edith and Lillian, Roy Moore. And yeah, they started, but
and they've not wavered. That's the important thing. They've always followed the teachings of the Bible, which is what we should be doing. And Joe, we appreciate all the work that you've put in, and all the elders and everybody who's helped along the way. And I think one of the greatest questions you ask is, what if those first two people decided somebody else should do it? We wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation today.
Yeah.
And how many lives were touched along the way? You know, how many apples in a seed? There was seeds in Weirton, and it grew into several churches, and ultimately this one here, Tomlinson Run.
Yeah.
And thank God.
I remember seeing Ben and Lori Way. I was just a kid, and they were old people then, but very faithful, you know. And I'll tell you, I can remember back then too, when you had church services, the members was there. Now, if you worked in the mill or something, I mean, you know, some of us, we had to work turn shifts. Well, you couldn't be. I remember one time, and I'm not bragging, it's something I did. I was working, I was just started in the mill. And of course, a greenhorn, you know. So I asked the boss one day, I said, I would like to have Sundays off. And he said, what do you want Sundays off for? And I told him, he was a nice guy. He said, what do you want Sundays off for? I said, I want to go to church. And I'd like to go to church, and I'd like to work Monday through Friday. Well, that was impossible. But I, being a greenhorn, I asked. So he stood there a little bit. He said, Joe, I can remember him looking at me. He wasn't making fun or nothing. He was serious. He said, we'd all like to go to church on Sunday, but he said it's impossible the way it's set up. Well, so what I did, I took me a while, but I found a job where I could be off, work Monday through Friday. Some of the guys, and I'm not bragging again, I felt I should do this, but some of the guys said, why don't you work on the weekend? You make more money. I said, no, I'm doing better than that.
Yeah.
I want Monday through Friday. But they like to work the weekend, time and a half, you know. Well, it did add up. It was an extra day on your pay. I just didn't want to do it.
Right. When the church started here, did they always have 2 services on Sunday and 1 on Wednesday?
Yeah.
From the start? Okay.
Oh, yeah, from the start, yeah. Yeah, I remember we had the dairy farm. On Sunday, we had to milk early. Dad tried to milk. We tried to keep it about 12 hours apart, you know. But on Sunday, we couldn't do that because back then the service didn't start till 7:30. So we would milk about 5:30, get the milking done, get cleaned up. Yeah, but they always had 2 services here. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know if that was something that, you know, has always been around the church, so okay.
Yeah. I remember when when they bought the building and got the service, got the worship and stuff, we could use the building and stuff. They had, some of the men went up and talked to different people about, coming, welcome to church. But there was, out on this road, there was one fella talked to my dad where Moore lives now, or did, up there where Gardner Klein and people, they had a farm there. That old man was a member here, I guess. But he told Dad, no, I don't want to go. It hurt a lot of feelings in the Presbyterian people, you know, but they didn't want to come here.
Yeah.
Earl come some, but you know, he never made the gospel or anything. But it did cause a lot of hard feelings in the community. But like Earl told me, he said my dad, he wanted to have services here, and they wouldn't even let him use the building.
Yeah.
Wouldn't let him know. Of course, I could see maybe responsibility or something, I don't know, but they wanted to shut it down, they did.
I'm out of questions, and I like to talk. Because because you've done a great job, Joe. I mean, that's gold right there.
Yeah.
Did he touch on? I may have not heard it, but did he touch on when they got the building? You know, the process of making it, but how long it took, like for them before they could actually start worshiping Him.
Oh yeah. I don't think we did a time frame. How long from the time that they purchased the building till it was clean enough to actually have worship service in it?
Well, I can't honestly say about that, but it wasn't very long.
Okay.
I know that because we helped, but it was a very short time. because
weeks.
we still had the wasp.
All right, a couple weeks probably to at least
Yeah.
to get it cleaned up.
Yeah, I remember that. But
'Cause from what
it was pretty close to the time that he bought it to take. Because I'll tell you, the men really and the sisters really went to work cleaning it.
Yeah.
Because the benches and everything, the seats were here. It was complete.
It
Yeah,
just needed cleaned up.
yeah, just needed cleaned.
20 years of cobwebs and coons.
Yeah.
And the wasps who joined the party at some point.
Boy, it needed work, and I'll tell you, the sisters worked hard. I
Oh,
got to
I'm
give
sure,
them
to
credit.
clean it up. Well, I mean, can you imagine how hard they would have had to work if they picked this building up and moved it over
Oh,
about 3 miles to the left?
they was going to tear it down to rebuild it. I don't know whose idea that was, but boy, I can
I
tell you
don't know
one
whose
thing.
idea that
they-
was, but then they thought it was a great idea to excavate an entire floor underneath it.
Yeah,
That's the
that
craziest story there is they
that
dug
Andrews.
the basement. When I heard that, they did what?
but that's what he did. He had that high lift. He
Right.
cut a road in,